All right, hey, we're talking a few tips here that, you're going to know how to tune the guitar better. Just kind of, without getting real highly technical, because I know there's a lot of new types of fretboards out there, and there's, different kinds of electronic tuners, etc. And it's easy to get caught up in gear. But I'm just talking about really mainly using your ear, right? Mainly using your ear. So if you do want to learn how to use your ear better, by all means, I encourage, maybe liking and subscribing. Maybe you'll see another video that you like. And any engagement, of course, is welcome. But I'm just talking about here, a few ideas on how to make sure that your guitar is more balanced when you're playing, especially if you have a guitar that maybe it's not your guitar, or it's an older guitar, or it's been played a lot since it's been kind of maintained, right? And the tuning could be off in a number of ways. Even there could be some adjustments that might need to be made. Unless your guitar is like really out of shape, for the most part, you should be okay to kind of just tune it up and do your best, right? And I know that when you're tuning up your guitar to a standard concert E pitch, you want to find maybe an E note, right, to match your E string to, for example. Unless you have like perfect pitch and you know exactly what an E note is, or maybe another note, you're probably going to want to find an E note from either maybe a song, you know the E note in that song, that one note in that song is an E note. That can help give you a point of reference, even somewhat a little bit of a memory of a reference. You sing a low note to a song that is a low E note, and you can maybe that gives you at least somewhat of a reference. But if you otherwise use an electronic tuner or match it to an exact note, maybe on YouTube or somewhere you can find a video with exact notes to match it to, right? But that's gonna help you get at least your first note, your E note, for example. Maybe you get some of the other notes in place. But even once you tune them up on the open strings like E, A, D, G, B, E, you tune those notes up to an electronic tuner or a piano or a video or something like that. That's playing the notes, you might still have other tuning problems, right? Especially with older guitar, or a guitar that didn't have it's not adjusted perfectly. For one thing, you ideally want to have some reasonably low action, right? This ain't super low, but it's low enough, in my opinion. You don't want your action to be too high or even too low, where you're getting string buzz or something like that. So, unless you're having, kind of more serious issues with the guitar, for the most part, you tune it up. You get it to an E note going, right? You get an exact E note, right? And then you can tune different ways to tune your next string to the 5th fret of the E string, right? To get an A note, right? So those two strings should match, right? Hum the notes, huh? Help internalize them as you tune your guitar, right? If that makes sense, you want to develop your ear while you're tuning your guitar, if you will. But you tune to the 5th fret, and a lot of people know this method here. You kind of go down to, and you definitely want to check this. This is something you definitely want to do. Make sure they all tune to the 5th fret, except for the G and the B string, which will tune to the 4th fret of the G string. Will tune to the open B string, right? And that should tune together, fine. And then back to the 5th fret for the B and the E string to match, E notes, right? They're both E notes. So of course that's one thing, and also making sure both of your E strings make sense together. But they're both open E strings, right? So they should make sense. They should also make sense on the 12th fret. They should also sound like both good centered E notes, right? And if you have an electronic tuner, you can check it. If you can hear it pretty well, you can get a pretty good idea. Doesn't sound like it's losing tuning up here with any of the strings. Maybe the intonation on your guitar is off in some way. Maybe it needs some saddle adjustment, or a new saddle or something like that, or the nut is somehow, usually more like something going on down here, or maybe even the truss rod might need some adjustment or something like that. But for the most part, just without getting into too technical and all those kind of adjustments I'm talking about, what can you do to make your guitar sound as good as it can when you're tuning it? Like I said, the main thing is to keep it all balanced, because like I said, even when you tune those open strings to perfect notes, even when you tune each one to a guitar tuner, right, they could still have off intonation when you get up here. Maybe the intonation's a little off balance. You tune these two strings right here, for example, on this 4th fret, this G string to this B note, right? But then when you get up here and you play it up here, maybe it doesn't match that well. You can see I even have a little bit. It's easy to bend these strings. You don't want to bend them when you're playing. You want to gently. They're actually pretty close. So you see these are 4 frets. Maybe 5 frets apart. Depends how you look at it. You see there's 3 frets between them, right? So for these 2 strings, they match close, but every other string matches a fret further apart, right? So these should match right there. So you can do all that. You don't have to necessarily match every single where, but another thing to do is to match every string from one string. Like for example, your E string. Right now, we're going to take the E note, and so the fifth fret makes an A note to match the A string to it. But how about the D string? Maybe we want to not only match it to the 5th fret of the A note, or A string I should say, which is a D note, the 5th fret, but we also want to match it to the D note on the E string. Where's the D note on the E string? It's actually on the 10th fret. If you if you know the 12 notes and understand maybe that, you understand when you're learning the fretboard, that's a whole other, I have other videos on that. I certainly encourage watching them. I appreciate you watching this, and, like I said, any likes or subscriptions are welcome, but like I said, you're going back to this D string, this D note, I should say, right? So we're going to match that to the D string. That should sound good. 10th fret on the E string is a D note, so those sound good, right? Now the same thing with the G string. Where's a G note on the E string again? And that's on the 3rd fret, right, of the, it's lower, then it's a G note, right? The 3rd fret of our E string is a G note. That should match to the open G string. Well, it should match. If it's a little off, you might, in some cases, if your guitar's a little off, adjustment or something like that, you have to make a little compromise. Maybe, like I said, if I match these 2 strings here, and then I go up here and it's off, be aware of whether you're bending the strings at all when you do it. Try not to do that, but also you might have to adjust somewhere in between those 2 points a little bit to get just a reasonably balanced tuning. But checking to make sure all these things kind of match. Now, there's also harmonics as well. So, like I said, we're doing, we're matching every string to the E string. We're matching the G to the G note on the E string. Going down to the B string, we're going to find the B note, which is right here on the 7th fret of our E string. So that should match. So that way all our strings are matching a singular reference point, if you will, right? Because, and they're not going to be maybe perfect. Like even when you press this down, it's almost a little off because it's bending the string a little bit. But for the most part, you should be, you can get real technical about it. But I think you'll find that when you do this stuff here, your guitar will sound brighter, and your chords, like it's one thing, also double check your chords, like some of your open chords, right? Like maybe a C major, of course, or an A minor, or an E minor, or an E major, or a G, and they sound like, the chords sound like it's in tune, right? Of course, that's, you do most of what we just talked about, you're probably going to feel like most of these are going to probably sound in tune down here. Let's say we play a C bar chord up here in this. Does that sound good? Sounds reasonable. Or, I can play some chords up here, I can play some other chords I know, but just playing a basic chord like a C major chord, or even going up here in the 12th fret and trying to play an E major. To the notes, that might be a little hard to do. Maybe especially you're a beginner or something like that. And you're saying, hey, you're going to jump right into bar chords and all that stuff right away if you're just like a brand new. But at the same time, I would start practicing them if you are new. Practice getting your finger strength so you can play bar chords up. Like this is a C chord, a C major chord, just like this is a C major chord. They're different shapes, right? Different parts of the neck. But like I say, you want to make sure chords sound decent when we're up here too as well, because if the intonation is off as you move up a string or multiple strings, these chords might not sound as good up here. So, this sounds decent to me. They sound like they're pretty well in tune. Don't get me wrong, if we get like real technical, we can, probably find something a little off tune or whatever, but for the most part, it's going to sound pretty well balanced. Now, there's also harmonics, right? You can split the string in half right here at the 12th fret and barely touch the top of the string. Don't press it all the way down, just barely touch it and pluck the string right at the 12th fret, right half of the string, and you get a harmonic. And they should sound pretty clean, like just like the open strings, right? For the most part, they probably will, unless you've really got a pretty good ear. You can kind of detect a little intonation factors from that. But also just playing the note right there all the way down, not just a harmonic. And playing it open on each string. And maybe taking electronic tuners. If this plays a B, like a perfect B note, does this also play the perfect B note right here? Right, if it doesn't, you might have to make a slight compromise. The intonation might be a little off, right? And then maybe this saddle's a little too close, or the bridge is a little too close or too far or something like that, and it's the length of your string is just not just right to make the 12th fret exactly half of the string, right? So it might be just a drop off. But you know, the guitar is made well. That shouldn't be a big factor, right? Probably won't have that issue. But even if you do, without having to do all those adjustments, you know, doing this kind of method of balance tuning, like I said, tuning every string to each note, corresponding note on one string, and you can do that with other strings too. You can find, you know, like a G note on the A string, wherever, right here. I can find, make sure that matches the G open string, right? There's a few different ways. Just think about it. Now, you also, these two strings right here always match one fret apart, and you can see they're one string apart, right? So right here, if I'm playing this D note right here, this will also be a D note, right? So those two should match anywhere on the neck. Down here, those two notes should sound nice and smooth together. These two should sound smooth together. If they don't, there's some intonation, maybe a little compromise needs to be made in your tuning. Tweak one of those two notes, and you know, as you're tuning up the other strings, remember it's going to be loosening some slack on the strings you just tuned. So you might tune up your E and your A and your D, and you get them tightened up to proper tuning for each of those strings. But then, especially if it's particularly out of tune, your guitar, you know, as you're tightening up these other strings, these ones are going to lose some tension. So you're going to have to go back and retune them as well. And always tune upwards to get to your final note. You know, if you have to drop it down a little low, and then tune up to your final note when you're tuning. So that way you'll sustain your tuning longer. Also, too, I recommend learning how to string your guitar without too much slack going on here, too much wrap around. You know, just enough, you know, 3 to 5 wraps for basically every string, right, at the most. And that way there's not a lot of slack going on there that could mess up your tuning, right, a little bit, or slippage, for example. Or when people overlap their strings. In my opinion, that's not great because it can cause slippage at any time, potentially. So, you know, like you said, we're tuning, you know, things to maybe all to one string and different, checking some other note areas, especially up here, you know, sounding how do these notes so they sound crisp, like they're in tune. You know, use your ear and play a few chords up here in this registers, higher registers. They sound right? And notice they compromise in any note, especially sometimes, like a lot of guitars will have a little bit of compromise between the G and the B string, especially because one's a wound string, it's kind of heavier, particularly in that way. And then also, these two strings are only separated by like a third interval, instead of where the other strings, I believe they're a fourth, if I'm correct. So, you know, that just is the interval of the tuning, like when we tune this fifth note, fifth fret to the next string down, right? So that's like a fourth note, so it's a perfect fourth, right? So we got our E note, and the fourth note in the key of E major is an A note, so it's a perfect fourth. To go to the next string is, you know, from an E note. The next string is A, is a perfect fourth. And it's the same with all these, except for between the G and the B string, it's a third, right? So it goes to the third note. So, which is, you know, like half a step down. So that's the reason why it's one fret higher to match notes on that string, right? Or one fret lower on this string to match, you know. So you can kind of get an idea of how that functions. The main thing is to make sure your notes match in a good number of areas throughout the fretboard, making sure there's a good balanced tuning in all your strings in different areas of the fretboard. Sound like they're in tune. There's also harmonics, like I said, too, as well. We did the half of the string here on the 12th fret, but we can also go down to a third of the string on the 7th fret and a fourth of the string. You can kind of barely hear them, but there's a fourth of the string on the 5th fret. Right. We can take the 5th fret harmonic and the next string down, do the 7th fret harmonic, and match those. You know, I have to practice to get a good harmonic, but you're barely touching above the fret, right on the fret itself, right? You know, we're barely touching it. So it's kind of like, you know, the it's thirds right there at this 5th fret. So this is just, I'm sorry, this is fourths, sorry. This is thirds. This is 1/3 of the string right here. And this is 1/2 of the string. So those are 3 harmonics. There's even, you can get another one down here somewhere. Just right, but it's not right above the fret. It's like a 5th of the string. So it's, you know, probably not use that very often. But these two are certainly usable, you know, for music purposes, but also to tune, like right here, 5th fret, 7th fret, 5th fret, 7th fret. Now when we get down here to G, we're going to do it a fret higher and not do a harmonic, just play the note. It's going to give us a matching note right there. Then the next one, go back to the 5 and the 7 and just do a harmonic. And you should hear them sounding the same. You can even take the electronic tuner, you know, maybe you see if the harmonic comes out giving you the right note. But for the most part, I think you'll kind of see what I'm talking about if you do this a few times and you tune your guitar this way a few times with these few different factors, or at least a few of them, not necessarily every single thing every time. Maybe once you get your guitar tuned up pretty well and you feel like, yeah, your guitar's always in tune, you know, the E's are always good, and you know, every now and then you notice a little bit of something you need to tighten up, or maybe the B string goes a little loose or something like that. But you get better at hearing it. And like I said, really humming along with the notes in many cases, especially when you're first developing your ear. C note. And humming with it too for a sustained period of time. It takes practice. Like, especially if you haven't done this before, I think you'll find that you'll have a lot of like vibration in your voice. You won't be able to hold a steady voice if you're not like a vocalist, or especially, or you haven't practiced at all. But I say practice it. Practice humming to different ranges of notes. You see, we got this C note right here. It's matching to that note right there, because we already talked about that interval, right? And these two strings anywhere, like this is a D note, this is a D note, and the same thing down here. We go to this A string, we play a G note on this A string on the 10th fret. That's G, G sharp, A, because the A is going to be the same as the open, right? And on the 12th fret, it's the same notes as the open strings, right? Just an octave higher, right? But if you go right there to this G note right here, we got, I'm sorry, yeah, we're not going to be playing on the G note. I'm sorry, we're going to go to the next string down right here, right? And this is a C note on the D string, right? C, C sharp, D, right? There's a C note here, and there's this C note right here. Now, when we get down to these two pairs of strings, these two pairs, they're a fret further apart. So we're not just one fret between, there's 2 frets between them. So when we go to this D string, and we play this B string, we play these 2 frets, they'll match. So, you know, we got here, this 2 match, and these 2 strings, these 2 match, 1 fret between them. But the next 2, there's 2 frets between them. And then, same thing down here. Right, so those should match. You can see, I can even hear a little bit of a wave. It's easy to bend strings while you're pressing them, so you got to be careful you really want to just test them and try not to bend them. You can see, it sounds pretty close for the most part right there. Whatever note, I go up a fret on each one of those. And that should be the same note. In this case, a B note, because we can see we're on the 12th fret of the B string, so that's obviously a B note, right? So this must be a B note, right? Let's go back up to the C note. Right? And that's the same as this C note. So we got 3 C notes right there. That's the same for any note, right? And so we go back to our A note on the 5th fret, right? Right there's an A note, right? You know, I can play it. You have to stretch to play the whole thing, but you see that's an A note, and then 2 frets between these 2. That's also an A note, right? So you can match notes up in that way to test them right a little bit. Maybe up here, match, you know, the A note here. Right here. Yeah, same. So I'm going from an A string. I'm going on the A string on the 12th fret, and then I'm going to this this 14th fret of this G string. Gives me another A note, right? A, and then the 5th. Well, not 5th fret. It's the same as the 5th fret over here. It's an A note, but it's way up here in the 17th fret, right? It's also an A note, right? So basically 12 frets higher than this note, just like the 12th fret is 12 frets higher than the open string. Right, so this gives you maybe a little bit of a reference point in terms of like which notes should match better. Like I said, we did this scenario here. We matched these two strings and those two strings, and then move my fret further for the second two pairs of strings, right? And those should match. All those pairs should match, right? And then doing the harmonics here, and you could also right here on the 12th fret match that to the 7th fret, I believe, right here on the next string down, right? So the same amount of frets as we're tuning down here, same fret difference. So, and even if we just play the note, it's the same note, E note, right? But we do the harmonic. We don't have to bend the string when we do the harmonic. We can kind of leave it not really bent at all. We just barely touch it. Gives us a little bit more of the perfect, match, if you will. So, right there, right there. Same thing down here. Right there, the A note, right? Same thing here. Then this one here, the B string can be a fret higher with no harmonic, right? That should match. And then on the last one, go back to 12th and 7th fret harmonics and match them, right? So that should make sense. They should sound the same, right? Like I said, you get an idea of how you might have to compromise with certain scenarios where, like you said, if you're on the lower part of the fretboard, notes are matching the way they should. But when you move them up here, they don't match the way they should. There's also another one, I think, that actually, let's see here. This is trying to see if this is another matching. It's hard for me to remember every single one. But anyway, you get the idea. You might have to learn your notes if you don't know them. If you do, you can maybe formulate. If you understand the 12-note pattern, right? And then there's A through G. And then one standard way to say it is that C, F, and G have a sharp, right? And then E and B have a flat, right? Then you kind of know the 12 notes and the 7 natural notes, A through G, and then it repeats itself, right? Then you have 5 accidentals or occidental, whatever you call them, is the sharps and flats, right? You have 5 of them. The C, F, and G have a sharp, and E and B have a flat, right? So then you got your 12 notes. Now we're wrong. Sometimes they can be said different ways, but as long as you know that 12-note structure, right, you can find the matching note on any string. You got E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A, B flat, B, C, C sharp, D, E flat, E. It's the same pattern from any note, right? Wherever part of that sequence you're on an A note, the next string down is A, B flat, B, C, C sharp, D, right? And it's going to match this many frets away on all the strings except for the G and the B, which will be a fret closer. Alright, so to give you some idea for some ways to check and double check the tuning to your guitar. You'll get better and better at it, and maybe having like a bass point to tune, you get a good solid E note from, for example, right? And then, like I said, once if your guitar's been out of tune for a while, go back and retune it again, until you get the tension to within that range where it's not going to be throwing your tuning off as you're tuning up your guitar, right? So anyway, let me know if this helps you. Maybe you get some ideas out of this, or maybe you have some corrections for me. By all means, I welcome them. Of course, I encourage welcoming even a questioning manager, because you could be wrong too. Who knows, right? About something. But by all means, I certainly appreciate you listening. You might see another video here at the end. I encourage watching if there's something of interest, or you might even go check out my channel for some other similar videos about other topics related to guitar, music theory, and so forth. But in the meantime, I want to say thank you so much for watching this video. Like, subscribe, maybe leave me a comment below. Alright, see you in the next video.